I want to talk about the meaning, basically the meaning of that theme, cultivating a heart unshaken, because it can be important for us as a guide to how do we work with it. And then I'll offer some strategies. How do we, like what does it look like? How do we do that with things that are confusing or difficult? But basically just a couple of parts, with a few subparts. So cultivating a heart unshaken, a heart unshaken doesn't mean somehow that we're like stoic or solid or we're not affected by things or that we don't have really kind of strong experiences or very refined, very subtle experiences. That a heart unshaken isn't about so much the content of our experiences as how we relate to them, the qualities of mind and heart with which we relate to them so that we can see actually what's useful and what's needed. I sometimes think of it just incredibly practically, like, how do I read the Washington Post? What's the quality of my mind and heart as I approach the day's news? And how do I discern what's useful and what's not? For me, on any given day, and maybe even on any given hour of any given day, how do I discern that? So our meditation practice is a practice of cultivating these qualities of mind and heart that enable us to have that kind of discernment. We're practicing, I think I may have quoted it last night, Ajahn Chah, there's a quote that goes something like, we're practicing on the cushion for those moments off the cushion when we lose our balance, when he says when passions kind of take over the heart and mind. When we're no longer aware of our experience, but we're sort of consumed by it. We're in it. We're sunk under the water. We're in the flood, and we don't even have discernment. So we're practicing on the cushion as we sit with our experience on the cushion to cultivate those qualities, a heart unshaken, a heart and mind that have the capacity to navigate life's floods. Ajahn Suchito has a book. It's called Navigating Life's Floods. Very appropriate for us these days. Meditation, practicing with each moment when passions contract the heart. And it's leading us somewhere. It's leading us. Our meditation practice is leading us. It's not pushing us. It's not kind of manufacturing something. It's guiding us to that deeper sense of alignment within ourselves, that place where, sometimes something will happen or somebody will say something and it just resonates. It resonates because it's coming from outside, but it's connecting to that deeper place in our own being that knows what's true, what's wholesome, what works. A place where we feel grounded and centered. A place where we can bring curiosity to life and joy, play, investigation. All those wholesome qualities, that place where we can relate to whatever it is that's going on with a lot of fluidity. Dan Siegel, the neuropsychologist, speaks of the acronym FACES. He says when we're in this place, and there's a lot of neuropsychology, by the way, these days, that speaks to both the presence and absence of these qualities in us and how we can actually cultivate them. But his acronym FACES is a place where we're flexible, FACES, flexible, adaptive, We can kind of, respond to this change and that change, and oops, now it's this, and this morning it was raining and now it's really hot, and we can kind of adapt to those changes. Coherent, as in our body and our mind and the right brain and the left brain and the different parts of our experience kind of function together. We all know what it's like when we don't have that kind of coherence, at least I do. I don't know about you guys. But, where we kind of feel a little kind of, where our body says one thing, our mind says something else. So coherent, where we're actually not fighting ourselves internally. Energized, the E, energized, where we have some energy, where our energy is in the realm of balance, where we're not so energized that we're driven by it, that we're hyper, can't sleep sometimes, and we're not so under-energized that we're collapsed. We have, no interest in or no energy for anything. So we're energized in a balanced sort. Not stable, like, okay, it's like this, but stable that over time we can kind of find it, we can come back to it. So our mindfulness is actually very consistent with modern neurobiology, that it's really cultivating a practice of being flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable when we're sitting on our cushion. Anne asked this morning, well, what about when I'm over here, in anger? Or what about when the alternative to being in anger is over here asleep? And so the invitation is, what can we do to cultivate an awake awareness of what's happening, which again could be tiny or it could be big. An awake awareness of what's happening without losing our way. And then looking to see what arises. Here's the part that requires some faith, at least at first, because when we are in that place of coherence and balance, we can see clearly what's needed. We get it. We see what's needed. And it arises sometimes magically, or apparently magically. We just see. And you've all had that experience. You know what I'm talking about. I see some nods in the room. You know that place. And it's magic, and you go, wow, that's really weird. That's fun. That's magic. And so the Buddha invites us to cultivate these ways, these wholesome skills, if you will, that allow us access to magic, to that kind of magic. And that's what feeds us, isn't it? That's why we come. We could be doing so many other things this weekend, but that's why you come here to do this really very difficult work, this very challenging work, is because you have enough experience with it to begin to kind of have, some sense that if I practice with this, really wholesome things happen, good things happen. And I don't even know quite how it happens, but good things happen. So our practice ideally leads to some sense of coherence, some sense of alignment. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, my practice doesn't do that. I just get all kind of cranky or whatever. We'll talk about that in a minute. Leading to something wholesome. I was talking in the interviews this morning a number of times about the Buddha's advice to Rahula. He says, have enough awareness, have enough mindfulness, have skillful enough mindfulness, Rahula, that before you do something, you look to see, will this lead to my affliction or the affliction of others or the affliction of both? While you're doing something, have enough awareness that you can track, is this leading to my affliction or the affliction of others or the affliction of both? Have enough awareness, Rahula, that after you've done something, without giving yourself a hard time about it, without, dumping on yourself or criticizing yourself or shaming yourself. Just discern, did this lead to my affliction, the affliction of others, or the affliction of both? He says this is how we learn. We learn how to kind of align ourselves with this magic by learning to observe our experience. Not because that's the end of the story. I told you about it, the Ajahn Brahm's story about the burglar this morning. Not because that's necessarily the end of the story, but because it's the beginning of the clarity of the story. Because otherwise we're kind of racing around, we're chasing our tails, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're trying to figure something out, and none of it really quite works. Huh? And then we think we're just, bad something or other. Bad something, I don't know, meditators or people or something. So we can take these difficulties as seeds, actually. The difficulty, the place where it doesn't work. The place where we say, well, that's all well and good, but I just am too bad a meditator, it doesn't work for me. Those are places that are really wonderful seeds that are like little signs. Here I can look and I can see the little exit signs, where the little exit sign is going blink, blink, blink. This is the doorway to the end of suffering. Right there, where we're finding ourselves so caught and so stuck. Blink, 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 blink. Working with this right here is the doorway to the end of suffering. And it doesn't seem that way. It just seems like that just can't be right. That's just wrong. I thought of a metaphor which was many of you know I like to garden, and in the spring I especially like zinnias. Somehow, it's the only flower I ever want to grow. And so I was planting the zinnia seeds in the springtime, and I don't know if you've ever looked at a zinnia seed, but if you go outside and you pick up one of those icky old leaves out there, and you take a little tiny fragment of it and you hold it in your hand, that's what a zinnia seed looks like. It is this dead, dry, ugly, stupid-looking thing. Or you take a radish seed or a lettuce seed, little tiny things. And then you put it in the ground as like, really? You put it in dirt? That's going to grow a zinnia, really? And then when we do it, we cultivate the faith that, it grows into this amazing thing, and there's no sense to it at all. How could that be? That little dead, ugly thing grows into this huge big bush that's full of amazing flowers. And so as we cultivate, as we practice over time, we gather that kind of faith, the kind of faith that it takes to plant a radish seed. We gather that kind of faith that if I follow these directions and then I look to see what works, it can be useful. I'm going to talk a little bit about the look to see what works part, and then I want to maybe go into some strategies. The looking to see, this whole process of meditating is an art. It's an art like gardening, cooking, athletics, golf, swimming, basketball, making bread, painting. You don't just sort of say, okay, I think I'll go on a weekend retreat and by Sunday afternoon I'll be an Olympic swimmer. And furthermore, if I just sort of follow the directions. Stephen Levine has a quote, I meant to bring it, I forgot. He has a quote, he talks about somebody who, really liked to learn. And he, wanted to learn about the stars, and he read all about the stars, and he wanted to learn about, some other kind of science, and he read all about science, and he wanted to learn about swimming, and he read all about swimming. And then he went in the water and drowned because he hadn't practiced, that our meditation is about cultivating over time. And that's the cultivating part, you know. It's about cultivating over time the discernment to see what does lead to my affliction, what doesn't, how does this work, how do these teachings work for me now, here, with this. Yesterday, I needed to kind of lean over to the right, and today in this circumstance, I need to lean over to the left. How do I know that? And it's about, basically it was like practicing swimming. You have to learn how it feels and how it works for you and your body and how it works for you and your body today and your mind. So this whole practice that we're doing is really an art form. And what you're doing here is just simply practicing. And you come with a teacher, not because I'm so brilliant or because it's so different for me, but because, there's somebody who can kind of say, well, I think you're getting in trouble with this little zinnia seed because you're planting it a little deep. Try planting it a little less deep. See how that works. Somebody who's maybe had just a little bit more experience planting zinnia seeds or planting radishes or, looking at your golf swing. Somebody who can kind of look at it and say, try. And it's usually that you are sure is the wrong way to go. Because if it was the right way to go, you would have already done it, and it would have worked, and there you are. But the fact that we're stuck means that there's something there that we're not quite understanding yet. We're not quite discerning. And that's where, we get help from our friends, and we get help from our teachers, and we get help from our readings, and we particularly get help from our contemplations. So cultivating over time this quality of balance and coherence in our awareness of what's going on. Not necessarily what's going on, because what's going on can have a huge, big range of energy, of activation. But can we kind of, have some coherence and balance in the awareness of it? One other thing, I promised some of the folks in the interviews this morning that I would bring a sutta and read it to you, because one of the things that can be a little bit confusing in terms of navigating a heart unshaken with respect to the world is that, the world meaning anything. I mean, the world can mean a heart unshaken with respect to our own emotional experience, or it can mean our relationships, or it can mean, again, the Washington Post or politics, or it can mean anything. So, really cultivating balance is really somehow going to be the way to navigate all these horrible things that are happening in the world, in my world internally and the world externally. And the Buddha is very clear. He says yes. And there's a wonderful sutta. Stop it. Keeps looking for the network. There's a wonderful sutta in which the Buddha tells a story about these acrobats. And the moral of the story is that the invitation is to bring this capacity for awareness to ourselves. As you've heard the analogy of, the oxygen masks on the airplane. That you bring this quality of awareness first of all to yourselves. And the Buddha, while he didn't talk about airplanes, did talk about that. He said, once in the past, an acrobat set up his bamboo pole and addressed his apprentice thus: "Come, dear, climb up the bamboo pole and stand on my shoulders." Having replied, "Yes, teacher," the apprentice climbed up the bamboo pole and stood on the teacher's shoulders. The acrobat then said, so the master then said to the apprentice, "You protect me, dear," and I'm leaving out the word because I don't know how to pronounce it, medakatha. and I'll protect you. You protect me. The master says to the apprentice, you protect me, and I'll protect you. And that's how we'll navigate balancing on this bamboo pole. You protect me, and I'll protect you. Thus guarded by one another, protected by one another, we'll display our skills, collect our fee, and get down safely from the bamboo pole. When this was said, the apprentice replied, that's not the way to do it, teacher. You protect yourself, teacher, and I'll protect myself. Thus, each self-guarded and self-protected will display our skills, collect our fee, and get down safely from the bamboo pole. That's the method there, the Blessed One said. It's just as the apprentice said to the teacher, I will protect myself. Bhikkhus, thus should the establishments of mindfulness be practiced. I will protect others, bhikkhus. Thus should the establishments of mindfulness be practiced. Protecting oneself, bhikkhus, one protects others. Protecting others, one protects oneself. And how is it that by protecting oneself, one protects others? By the pursuit, development, and cultivation of the four establishments of mindfulness of the body, of the breath, of emotions, of feeling. It is in such a way that by protecting oneself, one protects others. And how is it that by protecting others, one protects oneself? And here he says something different. He says by patience, harmlessness, loving kindness, and sympathy. It is in such a way that by protecting others, one protects oneself. So basically he says, it's really kind of counterintuitive perhaps, but the way to balance on that bamboo pole is to really cultivate that capacity to have our awareness in a range of balance. I'm going to take a little digression. Somebody asked me to amplify the Goldilocks reference. Don't go too deep into the Goldilocks reference because it kind of falls apart, as most metaphors do, falls apart rather quickly. But some of you may remember from your childhood, there's this fairy tale where it's Goldilocks and the three bears, and the three bears make this big batch of porridge, and then they decide, oh, it's way too hot to eat yet. Let's go out for a walk in the forest. And so they leave the pot of porridge on the stove. And Goldilocks, being very nosy, and she comes in, she finds the bear's cottage, and she comes in and she looks in the bowls. They have put their porridge in their bowls, and there's a big bowl and a medium-sized bowl and a small bowl. Some versions of the story they're different, but some versions of Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear, but don't get too tight on that one. But so there's a big bowl, a medium bowl, and a little bowl, and she tastes the big bowl. She says, "Oh, that's way too hot." And then she tastes the littlest bowl, and it's way too cold. It's just a little tiny bit, so it's already gotten cold. And then she tastes the middle bowl, and she says, "Oh, that one's just right. I'll eat that one." So she eats that porridge. And then she goes, and she sees there are three chairs, and there's a big chair, and a little teeny chair, and a medium-sized chair. And she sits in the big chair, and she says, "Oh, this is way too big for me. It's not very comfortable." And then she tries to squeeze into the little chair, and it's way too teeny. It doesn't fit. And then she sits in the middle-sized chair, and it's just right. And then she goes and she sleeps on the bed. She lays on the bed. The big bed is way too soft, and the little bed is way too hard, and then the middle bed is just right. It's the Buddha's teaching. He talks about the middle path. Can we cultivate a quality of awareness that's not so aroused that we can't eat it, we can't function. I just mixed metaphors there. But that's not so aroused that we can't function, and it's not so under aroused that we can't function. Can we cultivate a quality of awareness that can maintain some kind of coherent stability, kind of no matter what arises? And I'm going to change what I just said, because no, the answer to that question is no. Most of us can't maintain that quality of stability. But can we maintain enough stability of awareness to know when we've lost stability of awareness, so that we then know that the only thing to do is to work to come back into that quality of balance. Because if we try to do it, if we try to navigate in the world without that quality of balance, we're going to mess things up. We're going to make it worse. I think about being in my garden. That some days, it's sort of like, well, Sharon, I should be in the garden, and I only have 15 minutes, but I'm going to go in, and furthermore, it's, downpoured last night, but I'm going to go in the garden, and I'm going to discipline myself, and I'm going to go in the garden, and I'm going to, fix it. And we know what happens, don't we, when we try, we run with that kind of attitude, or we cook with that kind of attitude, or we do anything with that kind of attitude. It's tight, it's tense, we miss things. I'm out there, clomping on plants, stepping on plants, doing more damage than good. And by the same token, if I'm under-aroused, if, it's just like I am so tired, I can hardly see straight, but really I should go out in the garden. Well, that doesn't work either, So that we really want to kind of cultivate, maybe what I need to do is to take a nap or go for a walk or drink a cup of tea or whatever to kind of come back into some sort of balance, but to have some quality of openness and discernment in the mind and heart and see what's needed. How do I approach? I mean, it's true that my garden needs to be weeded. That's very true. But what approach really is leading to my affliction and the garden's affliction or not? How can I do this in a way that leads to wholesome results? So really, that's the Buddha's teaching. That's the path that all of these teachings are guiding us toward, and they're all really kind of holograms. So having said that, I want to suggest just 4. There are, of course, many more than 4, but 4 ways of thinking about, how to navigate our own experience as we discern where we are in relation to it. And one way to navigate it is to, I'll say it 2 ways: run away or step away. And there are a couple of different ways of thinking about that, and the Buddha actually gives us some really good examples of that. One example is when the Buddha had for years practiced all these ascetic practices. We know the story. He had practiced all these incredible ascetic practices, and he was literally near death because he was so good at it. He was kind of at that extreme of just pushing, and literally about to die from malnutrition and exhaustion. And as he was sitting there aware of his experience and aware of all the teachings, the avalanche of teachings that he had been studying all those years and been so good at, he realized, he said, this isn't helping. He said, what good does it do if I just die not enlightened, I haven't met my goal? What good does it do? I think maybe the teaching isn't working for me. And so he decided to accept the bowl of milk rice from Sujata and to receive it as a way of giving his own body and mind some energy. And it was that helped him see that middle path. Oh, it's true that if I just kind of lounge around in the palace eating bonbons, I'm not going to really get to the end of suffering. But it's also true that if I only eat 1 grain of rice a day, that's not going to get me there either. So can I find this middle path? I have found, and he goes on almost immediately to enlightenment, can I find that middle path? So to step away when something just isn't working. We can see that something just isn't working. Sometimes the best we can do is not do what is not helpful. I don't know what else to do, but I'm going to not do what is not helpful. The Buddha also gives us another example, and Susan in her book, The Kosambi Intrigue, really goes into this in much wonderful detail, where he was at Kosambi and the monks, the monastics, got into a big fight with each other about the rule, about how to interpret the rule. And the Buddha is there. He says, "Hey guys, I made the rule. You could ask me. I could help with this." And they went, "No, no, 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 no." And they're determined to fight. And he tried, multiple times to help them. And they weren't having any of it. And he finally said, "Okay, I'm going to take my bowl and I'm going to go out in the forest. I'm going to leave." Because he saw that there was nothing he could do. At that moment there was nothing he could do. And he also saw that letting the kind of causes and conditions play out was really what was going to have to happen. I actually think of that a lot, just personally, when I, read about politics or what's going on, that there are things that are kind of gossiply interesting, but really are none of my business. And there's nothing I can do about them other than be annoyed or upset, and it's just really not so helpful. So maybe to step back and to just leave it, let it be, let it play itself out. Sometimes our relationships need to do that. I just got a call just shortly before I came on the retreat from a very dear friend who doesn't live anywhere near here, who is one of the strongest meditation practitioners I know. Really, if I need, a Sutta reference or something like that, that's the person I will call. And they called and they said, "You'll never guess what just happened. I had signed up for a 10-day retreat. I've been looking forward to it for years, or, this studying with this teacher, looking forward to it for the longest time. And a few days before the retreat, I had a whole bunch of medical tests, and I don't know what the results are, but, it's really kind of troublesome what the results might be. And so my system has gotten really agitated, So nevertheless, I drove to the retreat, got there, and almost immediately had a panic attack and realized I need to not be here. Turned around, got in their car, and drove home. This retreat they had been waiting for years, they were at for 15 minutes. Wise choice. Because kind of forcing oneself to sit through a retreat when the system, is just not coming online here, it isn't wholesome. It's not useful. So I thought it was just really quite brilliant. Because we are, the ultimate goal of our practice, we want to be gladdened, at peace, freedom from suffering. We need to remember where we're going here. There, I just did 3 pages. Look at that. So when the situation is, or the experience is overwhelming our capacity to be aware, can we allow ourselves, can we give ourselves that freedom to step away, whatever that might look like, whatever that might mean? Or when the situation is one in which you will be caught in reactivity. And sometimes I think about that when I, actually, not too long ago, I got 2 different emails in my inbox. And I knew that I was planning, what I was going to do on this retreat. And I saw both of them. I saw the heading, and I just knew that if I read these emails, it would take up some space that I didn't want it to take up in my mind and in my heart. I kind of knew they would piss me off, you know, and I just I didn't have the wavelength, didn't want to go there, even though I was really curious, wonder what they said. But just, it wasn't wholesome for me to engage in it because I knew that the likelihood of my needing to navigate some reactivity was fairly high. Stepping away. Just wait. It's that thing where you say, let me wait to write that email response. Yeah, let me wait. Indeed. So that's one strategy. Just say, not wholesome for me to engage with us for whatever reasons. Second strategy, to break contact but stay in the proximity of the situation. So we're not kind of quite engaged with it, but we're sort of back a ways from it, considering maybe our own experience or considering the situation. It's appropriate for situations in which you can feel some emotional disturbance, but your emotions are still manageable. The arousal is still manageable. I said that wrong. I was looking at the wrong place. So this is sort of like, the second one is sort of like having a bit of a speed bump. It's the sort of thing where you're in a situation with a family member or a relationship, and somebody has said something that's triggered you. And you have enough awareness to notice that there's a level of arousal, and that if you respond to the email, or if you say something, it's not likely to be wholesome. It's not likely to be useful. So there, you're kind of stepping back. It's actually more like what I was saying before in the email. You're stepping back. It's like, I know I'm going to need to bring attention to those two circumstances in my email. And when I do, I'm going to really be sure that I have some kind of a bandwidth, if you will, to be able to kind of consider it without needing to immediately respond. My pause is, I can think of an example, but I haven't asked permission to share it, so I won't give that one. Let me think of another one. I can't. To kind of be allowing yourself to be in the proximity of the difficulty, but not requiring an immediate response. So you're sort of like tipping your toe out there into the water, but not fully engaging with it, and not necessarily engaging with the response. So it might be suitable for a situation where you kind of know you usually kind of get activated, and you are going to encounter that situation, and then you take some time ahead of time to kind of bring it into your awareness, to kind of feel your way into, okay, how can I be with this, keeping these qualities of mind and heart in my awareness, so I'm not kind of slurped into the middle of it without my capacity to navigate it. Kind of gauging the force, if you will, of the stream to see, whether or not really I can drive through it. And we need to kind of pause, look and see, do I have the resources to drive through this stream, this water, or not? We look and see. And indeed, sometimes we can cultivate the resources as we're waiting, as we're stepping back. The third example is to stay in contact but include more. What does that mean? It means, I'll give you an example. Some of you have heard this example before. One time I went on a retreat up to IMS, and just before I went, I had some very disturbing family news that had my mind and my heart just agitated. So I would sit on my cushion and I would be agitated. And I would do walking meditation and I would be restless and agitated. And I would try to go to sleep and I would be restless and agitated. And so I'm just working with it. And one day I was doing my walking meditation, with my mind kind of churning. I'd be like walking feet, floor. Okay, come back, walking feet, floor. And so I started to wonder, is there any part of my being that isn't agitated? So I looked, yep, head agitated, shoulders agitated, heart agitated, back tight, agitated. I just went through my whole body and I finally discovered that my toes weren't agitated. My toes were just fine. So I included that in my awareness. I also discovered that the room I was in wasn't agitated. So opening awareness is, I invited you last night to kind of be aware that even if you're agitated on your cushion, this room doesn't get agitated, It's just happy being a floor, it's happy being walls. Its job is to be a ceiling and to be yellow and blue and all these things. It's fine. The cushion that you're sitting on isn't agitated. Huh? It's just there. It's just fine. It's happy. So you can include more information in your awareness such that this difficult experience that is kind of hard to be with can kind of have some context. We can of course do that with things out there. It really helps me when I think about, sometimes people or politicians that I find challenging, if I can kind of put them in context. I think about, well, what were they like when they were 2? What was life like for them when they were 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 or 10 or something like that? Putting it in context gives me a bit more space with which to cultivate that quality of patience and loving kindness that the Buddha talked about. So to stay in proximity, to stay in awareness, but to include more. Getting curious about the whole picture, not just the hard part. And then the fourth one is increasing contact. And this is appropriate for objects that have been disturbing or might become disturbing, but aren't too overwhelmingly disturbing right now. And it could be even something big. You could, for example, have a very strong feeling that you have the energy and indeed the resources. It's one of the things. It's not like therapy is a panacea for everything, but it's one of the reasons we talk to therapists, isn't it? That they're sort of like, we have some confidence that somebody can kind of help us with that container and help us include more of the experience that we're a little afraid to touch all by ourselves. That's why we have interviews on retreat, to kind of have some sense that maybe there's somebody who can kind of help us, who isn't caught inside the experience itself and is able to help us really include more spaciousness. I've told some of you a story about a time recently when my husband helped me. I was in this kind of wrangle with one of my family members, and my husband just helped me by offering context and offering spaciousness. So it wasn't just the context, which was really helpful, but it was that he wasn't caught in it and was able to kind of kindly, because he knows me so well, kindly help me broaden my own capacity to be with this difficult experience. And so sometimes we need the help of a friend to be able to do that. But sometimes we have the energy. We kind of go, okay, I really have the energy to kind of touch into this challenging feeling quality, this experience that's arising. I really have the energy to take it on. So we need to discern whether we do or not. So again, cultivating. Back to the word cultivating. Our practice is a practice of cultivating. A little bit, a little bit, a little bit. This is Suzuki Roshi, one of the most amazing Zen masters. He says, after you have practiced for a while, you will realize that it's not possible to make rapid, extraordinary progress. How's that? Even though you try very hard, the progress you make is always little by little. It's not like getting out in a shower when you know you are getting wet. In a fog, you do not know you are getting wet, but as you keep walking, you get wet little by little. If your mind has ideas of progress, you may say, oh, this pace is terrible, but actually, it's not. When you get wet in a fog, it's very difficult to dry yourself. So there is no need to worry about progress. Just be sincere and make a full effort in each moment is enough. Some of you have heard me say that when I was first with my husband many years ago, he told me that, or he told me later, he didn't tell me then, that I was the most angry person he had ever met. And little by little, it's not true anymore. Now, when did that happen? You know, little by little by little, by little, by little, by little, by little, by little, practicing, coming back, little by little. It's true for all of us all the time. So really let yourself cultivate and allow a quality of patience, curiosity. If we don't have curiosity, we're cooked. We're just pushing things around, you know. Mindfulness, the second factor of awakening, is investigation, that quality of curiosity. What's needed here? What's happening? What's needed here? What's wholesome? What leads to affliction? What doesn't? So a few thoughts for your consideration. And the quote I offered you last night, Nibbana Pachaya Hotu, may this, whatever the this is that you're experiencing, become a cause for awakening. It's a seed. We'll practice. Thank you.